Good morning, all. We have about another minute before noon, so I'm gonna wait to see if anyone else hops on that we can get underway. Thank you for being here. Hi, Joan.
Hi, Steph.
How are you?
Good.
Good. Okay, I'll get going. Um, all right, I feel like it's is a hot topic this month especially. The majority of our questions I feel like have been around the inspection, around right to cure, around notice of defects, especially. So, thank you for being here. It's definitely a topic like is again, this isn't just for new agents. I mean, every single transaction is different, so even getting a refresh on this is helpful as a seasoned agent. And until you run into the certain ways that the inspection contingency can go, you just don't really have an understanding of how it can play out. So, I didn't really get my head wrapped around it totally until I could see all of the different ways that the inspection contingency can go in the contract. So, last week. I'll backtrack to the whole month. So, we started off with kind of going over the real estate condition report and the listing contract and kind of like discussing the piece that our sellers have an obligation to fulfill in terms of filling out that real estate condition report, naming those defects that they are aware of. And then last week, Joan went through the inspection contingency. Um, as how it relates and how it looks in the offer itself. So looking strictly at the contract language. And now we're going to round this out by going over like best practices around negotiating the inspection contingency and so forth. So, all right, let's get going. We'll start with the definition of a defect. So a defect is defined in a three bullet point definition. So, and this is what how our contracts read. So one thing to point out is that this is a different definition than what our inspectors are operating on. So it's close, but we'll point out the differential in a minute here. So, one, that it would have a significant adverse effect on the value of the property. Two, would significantly impair the health or safety of future occupants of the property. Or three, if not repaired, removed, or replaced, would significantly shorten or adversely affect the expected normal life of the premises. So the difference here is that an inspector is not looking at the effect that it would have on the value of the property. So that's important to point out. All right, so before we even get into writing the offer, before we are even starting that inspection contingency or that inspection process, the buyer is going to receive a copy of the real estate condition report. So again, before you're even reviewing or before you're even making that offer, drafting that offer, the buyer needs to review this real estate condition report. So are there any concerns that the buyer has with what is disclosed in the real estate condition report? Number one. Another thing to point out when it comes to the real estate condition report is that it's not that the buyer is accepting these defects when they are signing off and acknowledging the real estate condition report. What they're doing is they're acknowledging the disclosure of these items. So what that means is that there is room for negotiation still, um, when they receive this real estate condition report. So depending again on what is named in that real estate condition report, so bullet point 3 here, should you address any additional inspections in the inspection contingency right away? So we talked about this last week in our team meeting. So using that line 196 of the inspection contingency, and I can pull up the inspection contingency language so I can refer to it. So in here, depending again on what is named in that real estate condition report, maybe the seller does disclose a leaking roof or a past leak in a roof. Does that mean then the buyer would potentially want a inspection of that component of that roof right away? And they're allowed to have that if it's named here in line 196. So instead of, again, waiting for that follow-up inspection or the recommendation for a follow-up inspection from the general home inspector, we could put it on line 196 right out the gate when we write that offer to purchase. Again, depending on what is named in that real estate condition report, should repairs be requested in the offer to purchase right off the bat? So this could be another option for the buyer. If, again, using that same example with a leaky or potential leaky roof, maybe the buyer just goes ahead and says, seller at seller's expense to have that roof evaluated and repaired as needed or repair as recommended. That's another option for a buyer at this stage again. So having conversations with the listing agent, again, taking the information that you have from that real estate condition report and asking if there are prior reports available. I can recall an example right this past weekend. I wrote an offer on a home that cited hail damage to the home. So my follow-up to the seller was, do you have a report on that? Did anything come from that hail damage that was cited? They didn't specify whether or not they had the siding replaced. They did not say how it was repaired. So I, as the buyer's agent, have a duty to the buyer to ask those questions of the listing agent. And it turned out they did have siding, like all redone. But they didn't include that information, which was wild to me. So, just making sure as a buyer's agent that you're having those follow-up questions and conversations with the listing agent. Then lines 210 to 211. We talked about this last week as well. So in the inspection contingency, we've got these lines 210 to 211 that state, for the purposes of this contingency, defects do not include structural, mechanical, or other conditions, the nature and extent of which the buyer had actual knowledge of or written notice before signing this offer. So as a buyer's agent, maybe you want to consider striking those. If there are items that come up on the real estate condition report, and maybe it's vague, in terms of getting to that notice of defect stage, you technically cannot name any defects that you had knowledge of. And to eliminate any gray area, a buyer's agent might consider, well, I'm going to strike this so that I can include what they have put on the real estate condition report when it comes to a notice of defects. So you might see this as a listing agent from time to time, and you're going to look for this as well. I see that we see this often. So again, this might be something as a buyer's agent that you want to consider if there's a lot of things named on that real estate condition report.
Remember my instance where the buyer's agent just crossed off the word not.
Right. And that's,
It was easy to miss,
yeah, and Joan missed that.
right?
So yeah, I would strike out, if you're gonna do that, we're gonna strike all of the lines 210 to 211, not just the word not there. So again, this is kind of setting the stage for getting into the inspection period. This is all happening, prior, or these are all considerations that you're making prior to writing the offer and while you're writing the offer. Um, and then, having the conversation with your buyer on if whether or not the seller, if the buyer wants to give the seller right to cure, um, in the inspection contingency. So again, we went through this last week, but as a refresher, and you could never, we can beat this, like, what's the term I want, the phrase I want, like, it's something we beat into people all the time, this concept of right to cure, but it's the who has the ability to kill the deal when it comes down to that final line in the sand when negotiations break down, when we're giving that notice of defects, when it comes down to that final notice of defects, in one instance, the seller, the buyer has the right to just terminate the deal based off of the delivery of that notice of defects. In the other, in choice B, giving the seller the right to cure, then the ball is in the seller's court to determine, okay, I've now received this list of defects, this notice of defects, I will cure, and I'll keep this buyer in the deal, and we are going to move forward. Or the other option that the seller has then is to release the buyer because they have elected not to cure. So again, that's only if that notice of defects is delivered, and it's kind of, again, that final line in the sand, if and when negotiations fail. We really want to concentrate, though, on negotiating defects always. Okay, so I've got more information on the lines 210 to 211, some more clarifying language around this. So not to get too much into the weeds, but, determine the nature and extent of a defect does come into play here in terms of, in the seller's, or excuse me, or in the buyer's discovery period, when they are learning about the true nature and extent of a repair. If it is learned that this leaky roof, for example, becomes an issue where it's recommended that the whole roof needs to be replaced, then that becomes really the defect, that it's not just isolated to this leaky roof, but now we've discovered through our follow-up inspections that that leaky roof has turned into a roof that needs a full replacement. So that now becomes the defect. So again, that's, in our goal with striking lines 210 to 211, what we're doing is just eliminating that gray area, and allowing ourselves the ability to add it to that notice of defects if it comes down to that. So, okay, so negotiating the defects after the inspection. So, okay, so again, to just kind of like lead us up to this point, we have drafted the offer, we have negotiated the offer itself, and we have come to an accepted offer. Now we are into having the inspection contingency, working through the inspection contingency. So we're going to have the inspection. We are going to receive that report from the inspection, or excuse me, from the general home inspector. We are going to now enter what's called like the information gathering period. So as a buyer's agent, we're going to send over the inspection report right away to the listing agent. So best practice here, the seller has the right to all inspection reports and to receive them promptly. It is a strategy for some to hold on to that home inspection report. When I say a strategy for some, I mean a strategy for buyer's agents to hold on to that inspection report and not send it until they have sent over their official requests. Joan and I are both in the camp of that is not good practice. We want to give the seller and the listing agent an opportunity to review those inspection reports right away. These reports are huge. Um, there's nothing worse than receiving an inspection report 2 days before an inspection deadline as a listing agent, and then have to scramble, have to like do your own research within this 2-day period. So again, as soon as you receive that inspection report, you're going to send it off to the listing agent. My practice is to give the listing agent a brief summary of what was found, but you're still discussing with the buyer on what is material to them. So, we're highlighting the bullet points of what happened in the inspection. You know, we found some trip hazards. We found that it looks like there was evidence of a leak or a past leak in this roof. Again, just bullet pointing everything, but your buyer also has not had an opportunity to fully go through this inspection report. So, we want to give the listing agent an understanding that more might come up in terms of what the buyer has issues with, right? So, I just think it's important to kind of set that stage as well. Like, this is what the most, again, the most impactful repairs that came up, but buyer is still reviewing the report. And then if known, at that time, I would also let them know what follow inspections you plan to have. So down here in yellow and highlighted, we've got here, so to develop your contractor lists. So your electricians, your plumbers, your foundation specialists, your roofers. So the contractors you're going to call for your follow-up inspections when they are recommended in that general home inspection report. We need to get information for our buyers. We need to let them know, they need to gain an understanding of what the costs are for these things. For multiple reasons, this is information that you're going to use to, perhaps negotiate with the seller later on. 9 times out of 10, that's what's going to happen. If it's a situation where the seller chooses not to negotiate on these things, at least the buyer has an understanding of the scope of work necessary so that they can take it on after closing. But it is our duty as buyers agents to go through this period and walk through this period with our buyer. They are looking for our guidance here. If there is a recommended home inspection, follow-up inspection on anything, you're going to ask that buyer, do you want to have a follow-up inspection on this? I sometimes will just insist that they have a follow-up inspection on certain components, especially with foundation, especially with roof, those huge ticket items that can cost a buyer, tens of thousands of dollars, right? We need to have an understanding of what these costs are. Again, it's all information, whether or not we're going to use this information to go forward and negotiate, or if it's just giving the buyer, information in order to feel comfortable moving forward. So this is too where I think it's important to stress like the difference between acting as a buyer's agent and acting as a seller's agent as well. So, with this home inspection report, when you're working as a seller's agent and your buyer is a customer, the difference here is that the buyer is going to receive this report. And if they're your customer, you're going to let them tell you what issues that they have, right? As a buyer's agent, we need to make sure that they're seeing the things that could cost them money, a lot of money. So we need to make sure that we're pointing these things out to our buyers. Again, whether or not they have issues with them, it's as a fiduciary, we need to, again, guide them through that and make sure that they have an understanding of, okay, we've got a follow-up inspection recommended for a foundation, we should really look at that and make sure that we're having a foundation person look at this foundation before we, as part of this process. I think I saw a chat go up.
Yeah, I just answered it.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Um, but we'd answer this for everybody. So do you call the inspectors to find out or how much the inspections will cost, or do you have the buyers call? How did you answer that, Joan? Because I would love to hear.
Middle of time, it says it's best to have the buyer call. It's the buyer's relationship with the inspector, not your relationship. So stay basically back from that and let the buyer call. But again, realize that some inspectors will have, and that's what I was about to type. Some inspectors will have an idea of how much this is gonna cost, but they're really not the person to ask how much. They might have a general estimate,
Sure.
but that's all.
For sure. Yeah, I guess anytime that there's a follow-up inspection recommended, we need to take it seriously.
Right.
Um, and then in terms of costs, um, this is part of too, like showing your value, as a buyer's agent, or as an agent, I mean, part of your business practice will be to develop these contractor lists. You're kind of like go-to peeps on these things. Um, and in terms of cost, there are some, usually with roofers or foundation people, they will come out and, it's part of their business practice to come out and draw up these or give their recommendations because they're hoping to earn business as well, right? So we help to feed them business. But there are also some out there who recognize. I had a glass guy tell me the other day that there was going to be a $50 trip charge for him um, because he was getting tired of agents calling him for estimates and then not seeing any business from it. So he had to make a business decision and say, okay, I can do this, but for $50 and I'll reimburse you. My point is, though, these are conversations that you're going to have with your buyer's agents at the time of your consultations and what they should expect when it comes to this whole process altogether and like what expected costs they might have. So, you're going to be paying for the general home inspection and any follow-up inspections if there is a cost associated. So, I think chimney is like another one where like right off the bat, usually that is a $250 charge or $300 charge. Matt, how do we handle situations where a house is being sold as is, but the buyers want inspections? So this is definitely a case where the buyers absolutely should have a home inspection. The term as is, that is definitely then invites the buyers to have a home inspection to figure out what is going on with the home. And then they can determine, based off of the price, is this worth it for me to move forward on this deal? Has the buyer or has the home final purchase price, is it left room for the things that have come up, right? When a seller says that they're selling as is, they're expressing, it doesn't mean that the buyer doesn't have an opportunity to still negotiate or attempt to negotiate on those things. What the seller is communicating is that they would, most likely prefer not to just actually do the work, but it might be the case where there is still um, an opportunity for a price reduction or a closing cost credit. But as if I'm seeing that a home is being sold in as is condition, then all the more reason to have a home inspection so that the buyer can find out if they want to move forward on it.
And decide whether to give that seller right to cure or not.
Right. That's an excellent point. That might be a situation where that we probably shouldn't be giving the seller the right to cure. Um, so that as that buyer, they can see what list of defects come up And if the seller is saying, I'm sticking with this price, then the buyer can say, okay, here's my notice of defects, then I'm not comfortable moving forward. Okay. Then, so on under kwrealtymke.com in our office resources, we do have a spreadsheet of recommended contractors. So I will say I don't think we make any representations or warranties about any of these. But this is a handy list for you if you need a plumber or an electrician or a painter, roofer. It covers everything. So I had to look at it recently myself to get some recommendations. Another trick is to go to our Facebook pages. I think a lot of this list was actually put together by our Facebook group. But in those search functions on our Facebook groups, if you go into the little search bar, just type in electrician and see what comes up because 9 times out of 10, somebody's already asked for that. Can't remember. I think I had to look for an engineer the other day. So I went to our Facebook group and typed in engineer and got a recommendation that way. So that's another tool for you to use as well. So um, yeah, we've got it covered for you, I guess is my point here. So, and then as you are meeting another chat, um, yes, Leah, it's a great tool. Then too, like you'll just start meeting people, as you maybe you're on the listing side of things and the buyer agent on the other end sends you a quote for something. I mean, you're just gonna kind of build your contractor list that way. And maybe you were able to meet that person when they went to do the follow-up inspection. Just start stockpiling the same way we stockpile lenders and our preferred partners. It's the same way. You'll start to get to know people who you like. Okay, so negotiating the defects after the inspection. So now we've had our general home inspection. We have had the follow-up inspections as well. So now we've got all of this information that we can use to go back to the seller with, possibly. So you're going to discuss the reports with their buyers. You're going to ask their concerns, of course. We're going to discuss what the inspector has deemed a defect in the report. So, our point there is that we're focusing only on defects. We're not focusing on maintenance and cosmetic issues. So safety concerns, again, major defects like foundation issues that are upwards of tens of thousands of dollars to remedy. What has the inspector identified that needs a follow-up inspection again? So, we're already past that point. We received the follow-up inspection. We're going to focus on those things and really try and guide that buyer. And guiding that buyer arguably starts again, you know, at that buyer consultation when you are showing homes. You know, we're not focused on minor maintenance and cosmetic issues. So if you're showing a home that these are pretty plain, things that are in sight that you can see. If those are going to be issues for a buyer, then maybe that's not the home for them. So, okay, so the buyer's response. So we're going to use an amendment. Um, that's the WB 40. So the buyer is free to make any requests to a seller. So this is the place to negotiate the conditions of the property that the buyer would want to see repaired or replaced. We're going to use those follow-up inspections as a guide. Are there items there that we think that we need to have complete prior to closing? Can the buyer take it on themselves afterwards if concessions are made? We can use a combination of asking for repairs to be done prior to closing We can ask for a price reduction. We can ask for a seller credit. We can use a combination of those things. But we're going to put this all down in an amendment. So I put a sample one here. So this was ended up being requests for, I think this was like the second or third amendment that we had, the final one that got agreed upon, but a seller was to hire a licensed electrician to repair or replace all the electrical items referenced in a what is happening? Okay, that was weird. I didn't even touch my pad. Okay. Um, so in this one, we had follow-up inspections. So we had KWK Electric went over, looked at the house, looked at the situation with the electrical. They identified what needed to be fixed. And I got I got a follow-up inspection for that. Same with AD Roofing. We got a quote for, I believe it was a full-on roof replacement in this case. So I've attached those estimates for reference for the seller, and we're asking for a licensed electrician to do it in accordance with how the in accordance with what KWK Electric identified. So we're saying to the seller, it's okay, you can have any licensed electrician do this work as long as they're following this scope of work. Bullet point 2, buyer and seller agreed to divide the total cost of the electric repairs evenly, the contractor to be paid at closing. So this was something that we negotiated in terms of just like this one repair. The seller and buyer agreed to divide that cost, but we still wanted it to be complete prior to closing. And then the seller agreed to replace the roof. And again, same idea. The seller could hire any licensed roofing contractor to do the work, but we wanted it to be in accordance with the estimate from this roofing company. And then we're going to spell out, we need to be specific with these things. So all work shall be completed prior to closing, paid invoices and lien waivers to be provided at closing, and then buyers waiving the home inspection contingency because we've agreed upon these repairs. I think in another version of this, it was bullet point 1 was here in terms of how the electric work was to be done. But then we had asked if we could just do a seller credit and for $11,000. But again, amendments going back and forth, that was not agreeable, and we landed on this one ultimately. So the seller's response when receiving the amendment. So this is where is there a max of number of credits seller can offer to a buyer? Good question, and I should have addressed that. But yes, I think I make a note to talk to the seller, the buyer's lender, because there is a max number that the buyer could potentially ask for. The rule of thumb is that it's 3% of the purchase price. But we always need to confirm that with the buyer's lender if a lender is involved. So, are you talking to listing agent before sending the amendment to the offer to purchase? Generally, yes. Generally, I shouldn't say generally, yes. Like they will have an idea of what is going to be on this amendment before you send it. For sure. So, and that's also why I kind of make the point to a listing agent, okay, these are the major things in the home inspection report, but the buyer is still discussing. The buyer is still, they're reviewing the inspection report and coming up with the list that's material to them. So in case there is something, I've definitely had buyers at the last minute say, hey, can you please ask for this? And I hadn't even had an opportunity to talk to the listing agent about it. So, I've included it and then I've talked to the listing agent at the time of my delivery. So, are you finding it mentioning certain defects in the amendments that lenders are having problems with what they see? That's a very good question. Maybe I think I'm going to circle back to that in terms of how to navigate the lender when it comes to negotiating the inspection. I'm going to circle back to that. So, okay, so you've come to what you have identified how you want, the buyer wants to see done and what we're going to ask for of the seller. So the seller's response, when they receive an amendment, they can agree to everything that has been identified on this amendment. They can say, no, I'm not doing any of it. And this is where competition comes into play. This is where, a seller might have another offer waiting in the rings. This might be that as-is seller who is like, nope, I'm not doing any of it. Sorry, you know. Or they can do some of the requests. So I got this line from Martha Ola, like roll off the tongue to our buyers. The seller can agree to some, none, or all of this. But you don't have to be worried about the seller canceling the offer because you made the request. So that's bullet point 4 here. So seller's rejection of an amendment does not mean that the deal is dead. By you, Mr. Buyer, making a request, that doesn't mean that the seller can kill the deal because of a request that you made. So a seller may respond with their own amendment. And just like, negotiating an offer, you're going back and forth with many different counter offers potentially. Same could be true for this period with negotiating the inspection. Maybe there's multiple amendments going back and forth and until you guys land on one. That just might be the case. Excuse me. So, ideally, if buyer and seller can come to an agreement, right away, draft that amendment and put it all together and then be on your way, that's great. But also, there's nuance here in terms of, the parties at play. Like it might be a situation where, it might be two very easygoing buyers and sellers. We can work this out verbally and then put it all on an amendment and be on our way. Or it might be the case where we have to just get stuff down in writing for it to be presented in a formal manner. So again, you're gonna kind of keep that in the back of your head too. It's, there's no right way or wrong way to do this. It's just, again, all like it's a variable in terms of the buyers and sellers involved always. So, okay, again, seller's rejection of an amendment does not mean the deal is dead. But again, going back to this, oh, no, X. This was a amendment that was executed, and buyer and seller went to closing. So if negotiations fail, so if buyer and seller do not come to negotiations and move to closing, but the home inspection is not waived, then that's when we get into the notice of defects. And again, we're always encouraging everyone to attempt to negotiate first. You would never go straight to a notice of defects. I mean, the contract allows for that, but it's just, again, we're kind of talking about best practices here. As a buyer, you're always going to want to make attempts with negotiating with the seller first and foremost. So if the amendment negotiating does not come to an agreement, then the buyer can send a notice of defects listing only the defects and any defects previously disclosed, but found to be of greater nature, extent and extent of the original disclosure. A little wordy there. Always in the buyer's court to serve the notice of defects. And then that right to cure determines who gets to quote unquote kill the deal, whether the buyer or the seller has the right to cure. Sorry, whether or not the buyer has given the seller the right to cure. So I'm drafting that notice of defects. So we're going to use a different form here. It's the WB 41. It's a notice. I wish I didn't write notice of defects here. It's really just the notice. But because it's the notice of defects, we call it the notice of defects. I think we've gotten that question before. Is there a specific form called the notice of defects? No, it's just the WB 41, which is a notice relating to the offer to purchase. So you're going to list all the defects that the buyer objects to in the inspection report. I really get heavy into the this idea of the true nature and extent as it relates to the real estate condition report. Do I send the lender the inspection report? No. Thank you. Well, yeah, we'll circle back. Actually, I'll circle back now. Okay, so Uma, so if the buyer did not give the option for the seller to cure, then what happens to the notice of defects? So again, yes, that notice of defects, if the seller did not get the right to cure, then the deal is automatically dead, just with that delivery of that notice of defects. So let's talk back. I'm gonna go back to this amendment. Okay, so yes, the home lender, there might be some flags with underwriting. It is not good practice to send a full-on inspection report to a lender. A lender might say to you, okay, I've got this amendment here. There is nothing on this amendment that states that there's a seller closing cost credit or a price reduction. So in that vein, the lender does not need to see this amendment because we don't have a price drop and we don't have a seller closing cost credit. I would talk to the lender and ask them how they like to operate when it comes to the inspection contingency. Do you want me to send you amendments that show that work needs to be done, Mr. Lender, and see how they respond? 9 times out of 10, I think your response is going to be no, I don't want to see that. What happens is that the experience that most people have when it comes to sending these to the lenders is that their underwriting team gets a hold of it and then they call for their own follow-up inspections, their own, yeah, kind of take it one extra step. Yes, Akeem, definitely. Take it one extra step that might not be necessary. So I think best practice would be to talk to your lenders again, ask them, how do you want me to treat any amendments related to the inspection contingency, and let them guide you on that. As a rule of thumb, though, the only person getting that inspection report when you receive it as the buyer's agent is you're sending it to the listing agent only. Lenders are generally not asking to see it. No, they don't require it.
Another thing that has come up, where an agent who isn't quite, well-versed will copy, certain phrases from the inspection report and paste it into the notice of defect. Which may always usually include what to deal with it, how to deal with it, what it causes, things like that, that do not belong in a notice of defect. The only thing that should be in a notice of defect is a list of the defects, period. So don't try to copy and paste out of the inspection report. Gives more information than is needed or required.
Yeah, I do have an example of that, for sure. Ariana's question on the amendment, would I need to mention the previous credit on the accepted offer? So that's a good question. So let's say let's say there was a $4,000 closing cost credit in the offer to purchase that was agreed upon at the time that the offer was executed, and it doesn't change. If it doesn't change, then you are not touching the closing cost credit. You're just leaving that alone. If you had your $4,000 closing cost credit, maybe to cover some carpet repair or carpet replacement or something, and you guys learned there was $3,000 worth of electrical work that the buyer now wants to see done and the seller is okay with giving that. Then you are going to add the two together. And yes, in the amendment, then you would adjust that credit to from $4,000 to $7,000. And this is where I've seen issues because let's say you only put in the $3,000 closing cost credit for the electrical repair, but then we didn't make considerations for that $4,000 that was already agreed upon. Then you've actually just changed that $4,000 to $3,000. We need to add the two numbers together if both are going to be considered. So good question. So again, if nothing is changing with that first number, you just leave it alone. It's still a credit per the first agreed upon offer. Then, but if it's going to change because we're adding dollars to something that we've found, then we're going to add the two together. And yes, Leah, I've also done the same thing where let's say buyers and sellers have agreed to a combination of things. So the buyer and seller have agreed that the seller is going to fix the electrical and the roof and some plumbing issues. But then they've also agreed to a closing cost credit of $4,000 to have the buyer fix a foundation after closing. Then we're going to put that $4,000 on a separate amendment that the lenders and title companies can see. And then we'll leave the repairs to another amendment that is just passed between the buyer and the seller only. So yes, good advice. Again, I mean, I always feel weary about how we approach that. I just would talk to your lenders again and like ask them what they prefer. But what Leah suggested here is generally what they're preferring. All great questions, love it. Okay, so back to the notice of defects. So back to what Joan was just saying. Um, an example here. Okay, so we've got oh, something got added to my screenshot. So the notice relating to the offer to purchase. You'll see this is a completely different form than the amendment. And I messed up here. So it should read, this is the notice by the buyer. So you're actually going to cross off seller to leave buyer. And you're going to say, this is a notice of defects. Seller is in receipt. I like to just add this because I want to reiterate that the seller has already in receipt of the inspection report. Buyer objects to the following conditions or repairs, and then you're just going to list them. So if you notice on the amendment that I shared with you guys, it dictated how it was to be done, who was supposed to be doing it, when it had to be done by. And again, at that amendment stage, at the negotiating stage, that's when you guys can lay all of that out. When it gets to this notice of defect stage, all of that is tossed aside. The buyer cannot dictate how or when or who is going to make a repair on the component listed. You're just going to list what is wrong. The leaking roof, the leaning foundation wall, the crack in the foundation wall, the double tapping in the electrical panel. You're just listing what the defect is. And then the seller receives this now. And do they have the right to cure? Yes, then okay, so this now we've entered into a new timeline, what I like to dub the right to cure period. So that's that defaulted 10 days on the I'm actually gonna go back to our contract language here. So right to cure. So we've got this default of 10 days. As a buyer's agent, I think a good practice is to shorten that up by quite a bit. So now that right to cure period has kicked in, if the right to cure was given, the seller has 3 days to determine, or 10 days if it was left blank, has those 3 days period to determine whether or not they're going to cure the defects, not cure the defects and let the buyer go, or they can just sit on it. So if they elect to cure, then that seller is going to send a notice back saying seller elects to cure, simple statement, and you're going to deliver that back to the buyer. If they elect not to cure, same deal, they're going to send a notice stating seller elects not to cure, and they can accompany that with a cancellation agreement that all the parties will execute. Or again, if they just sit on it, if this 3 day period comes and goes and we're on day 4 and there has been no response from the seller, then then by that passage of time, then the deal is dead that way. So that's why I like to shorten this period. I don't want my buyers sitting in limbo for 10 days, to find out whether or not the seller is going to cure or not. I want them to serve the notice of defects, and we'll find out within 3 days whether or not the seller is going to cure it or not. So, again, as a buyer's agent, that's why, I just want to shorten that for our buyers.
Steph, I'm sorry, did you say that if they don't respond to the notice, it automatically voids the contract?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So you need to be mindful of that too, because, and I always like to share this example because it was the first time I had ever seen it play out that long. And it was, we're still good on time. We were on the buy side. It was it wasn't me personally, it was one of our agents. We were on the buy side, and seller or buyer just wanted out of this deal. They did not want to move forward. They wrote up a notice of defects, a very long notice of defects, and we delivered it to the seller. The listing agent just responded back with an email saying seller is electing to cure, and did not do it via a notice, which is how it is mapped out in the offer. And it was kind of a contention point, but we didn't say anything to that listing agent. We didn't say to the listing agent, oh, can you please put that on a notice? And we waited for that, that 10 days, and the agent and I were just like, holding our breath, waiting, because we really didn't want the listing agent to figure out what they did. And then literally day 11 rolled around, and we served a notice back to the seller again stating that the deal was dead because they never properly delivered an election to cure. So, yeah, I mean that, these details matter. So I'm sure that listing agent had a very salty seller on her hands after that happened. But this is why we have to follow contracts.
It is in our systems.
Can we mute, please? So, but it was.
I have a question. This is Uma.
Yes, Uma.
Sorry about that. My husband is in another call. So, okay, so you're saying 3 days for the notice of defects, right? So on the fourth day, should the buyer's agent send an official notice saying like the deal is dead? How do you know the deal is dead? Like who decides? Is there any proper way to send that?
Wait, on day 4, should the buyer agent send what?
How do you notify that the deal is not valid anymore?
Yeah, so so on day 4, we sent a notice stating that the deal was dead. As the buyer's agent, we sent a notice saying that the deal was dead because they had not properly delivered the notice, and just by that passage of time. So then we sent that notice and the cancellation agreement. Yep.
Oh, is there any notice form, or is just an email with the cancellation agreement?
The notice form, yep, is the is the WB 41.
Okay, WB-40 form and the cancellation agreement. So that means the earnest money, everything comes back to the buyer.
I will never say that. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that's what, there's no
yes,
right
we can't
answer for
say that,
this.
but yes, it would be assumed that the earnest money would go back to the buyer. Yes, because
Okay.
the seller failed to,
Respond by on time.
yes. So, oh,
What if the seller is not willing to do all the changes, but still they would like to sell the house?
okay, so that's a very good question too that I should have.
Sorry, I have a lot
Oh
of
no,
questions.
I didn't hit this bullet point, which is this is meaningful because when we get to this notice stage, the seller then has to cure this full list on here. The seller has to cure this full list on this notice of defects. It's an all or nothing when it gets to this notice stage. So that's why it's important, to come to negotiations via an amendment, because, when as a buyer, maybe when we were negotiating, they were only focused on 3 or 4 things, right, that they took issue with. But now if we get to this notice stage, they're going to list things beyond that, that original list, because they might want to get out of the deal. So they're going to say like, I want all of this fixed now, or you've got to release me. So yeah, they cannot pick and choose. And I think we had a question here about who gets to decide on what is the defects between the co-brokes and what can or can't be a negotiation on. So at this amendment stage, anything is up for debate. The buyer can ask for whatever they want at this stage. When it comes down to defects, and if a seller has a disagreement about what a defect is, then we need to point them to an attorney. That comes up a lot on what is deemed a defect in terms of what the seller believes to be a defect and what the buyer believes is to be a defect. So, insurance companies have been singling out roofs 15 years in age. Yeah, that amendment that I was just referring to, that my seller had to replace a roof for that reason. Yeah, it's been a sticking point. And it's all conversations back to a seller. So, if the seller is not willing to work with a buyer on a roof that is over 15 years in age, yeah, I'm only just recently dealing with this, helping and guiding our agents on this. Yeah, I mean, the conversation back to a seller is like, this might come up again. So we either handle it with this buyer, or we wait and hope for the next one, and it'll be a non-issue. That's a good question. You're gonna stump me. I don't know what best practice is right now. Buyer and seller could come to an agreement to split it. But yeah, this is kind of a new territory for us all. And we kind of need to wait to see how a lot of this has been playing out. I don't have a good answer. I don't. I think that was my last slide. So I'm going to open it up. Thanks for, I'm gonna open it up to the gallery so I can see everybody. Akeem, what were you had a complicated question. Was this in line with that?
So this is actually a little different. So I kind of have a circumstance where some clients are purchasing a house, offers accepted. They're using an FHA loan. And one of the things that they sort of knew beforehand was that it wouldn't pass an FHA inspection as is. So there's so there's an amendment where the buyers actually have certain rights secure within, so it's like they get to do the repairs that the the loan
So you guys
that
negotiated.
they're essentially requiring. And one of the things, or one of the questions I have is, I just recently got an email from the listing agent, and she says, so I think I'll put the key in a combo box. Do you think we should do an amendment or not so the lender doesn't see? I'm wondering about liability too, like a hold harmless. And she says maybe overthinking it, but it's not typical for me that a seller allows it. So I was just wondering, I know it's kind of a unique circumstance, but in that circumstance, do you think that would be
Meaning, because the buyer's gonna go in themselves and make repairs?
exactly, or contracted out?
Yeah. Yeah, let me talk offline with you. I'm
Yeah,
sure we've come up with something where it's like, yeah, the buyer agrees to hold the seller harmless if something were to happen, while their own contractor was in there for sure.
right.
So, I think it depends so much on like what exactly needs to be done. Like I've replaced,
Mhm.
like a buyer and I have replaced a handrail and painted together, so but
Right.
if it's something more involved, then yeah, let's talk offline.
Okay.
Okay. Ashley, do you have a suggestion on what you would ask for a closing cost credit reduction in price or a complete repair? If closing cost fees for the buyer is only 10K, but repairs are 20K, would you not ask for a closing cost credit then? It's so dependent upon every transaction, um, and buyers' wherewithal in terms of what they're willing to take on. I mean, ideally, if there's time before a closing, I think it's nice to shoot for a buyer or to have repairs done prior to closing. If that, again, like if time allows it and the availability of the contractor is there, if they can get it done prior to closing, I always think that's the best bet. But this might be a situation where an escrow, we didn't even talk about escrow agreements, but that could be a solution here too. So if repairs are 20K, you could ask for 10K in a price reduction and 10K in closing cost credits. That could be a solution here. If they were not willing to, or if the seller was not willing to do the repairs prior to closing. So again, it's all kind of transaction dependent. Um, and I've like for big stuff like foundations and stuff, like again, shooting for that repair to be done prior to closing, and then maybe it's just like piddly, like minor electric or plumbing repairs, and you kind of were able to figure out that it would be like $500 to fix those things. So maybe then the buyer asks for $500 in closing cost credits to make those repairs after closing, but that foundation is going to get done prior to that. So again, yep, just transaction dependent. Any other questions? I think I really just want to come at this again, kind of more from the point of view of a buyer's agent and just really like having an understanding of your job in this period. And again, it's not like we're requiring a buyer to care about something or like, it's just we have a duty to like point things out, especially when it comes to like a follow-up inspection. Maybe a buyer doesn't, care about electric issues that were called out on a home inspection. Um, but again, I think we just need it's our duty to point it out to them and make sure they see it. That's a small example, but yes. Okay. I'm gonna stop talking awkwardly and let you guys go. Thank you for being here always. This is a big group and I appreciate it. Joan appreciates it so much. Um, Thank you, and we're here to answer, again, yes, these like weird situations and kind of talk through what would a best approach could be. So, okay.